Hey y'all, Matt here with another Bible video, and today we're getting into Christmas. So let's talk about Christmas stuff. Let's talk about the wise men, and this is actually something that's come up a couple times this week as we talked about nativities and looking. We went to Tanglewood the other day with the kids, and I've heard questions about it from friends. And so let's talk about part of the nativity, and specifically, let's talk about the wise men. If you have a nativity at home, you probably have some wise men in it. This is the one that I stole from our nativity that's in our living room. But when we look at the nativity and a lot of the stuff that we believe about the Christmas scene and Christmas plays in church and stuff like that, sometimes we don't necessarily get all the historical facts straight. And we've done videos on this before last year, but let's hit it again this year, refresh our memory. The first one is that we don't necessarily know how many wise men actually came. Scripture actually tells us that there were 3 gifts brought by the wise men. So traditionally, we assume that it was 3 wise men, and most of our nativities have 3 wise men. Most of our songs have 3 wise men, but it could have been more or less. We don't know. But they brought 3 gifts, and that's usually why we go with 3 wise men. Another thing, the wise men, they weren't like really smart guys as we think, but a wise man back in this time period was these guys that you saw in the Old Testament, the Egyptians and the sorcerers and the astrologers. And these were the guys that the kings often went to basically for guidance. What do the gods think about this? And they'd look at the stars and the moons and stuff like that, perform magic, all these things to try to figure these things out so they could advise the king. Another cool thing, oftentimes these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, some people, church tradition, they read into these gifts that the gold represents a king, it's wealth. It's used in trade. The frankincense was actually something that was burned in the temple. So we see the priestly role of Jesus in this gift that is brought to him. And then the third one, myrrh, is something that we don't deal with a lot, but it was very important in this time because they didn't have modern embalming like we do. So myrrh was a spice that was often used for basically to cover up the scent of a dead body. And so we see foreshadowing of the death, burial, and ultimately the resurrection of this king that they're coming to worship. Another cool fact about the wise men, scripture actually says, it's often overlooked in verses 1 and 2. We see this. It says they came from the east, and this is a very important detail because east of Israel is Babylon. And we don't know necessarily for sure because it doesn't specify where they came from the east. But there's a very real possibility that these wise men that came could be descendants that we see from the book of Daniel, of the wise men that Daniel was actually appointed over when he was in exile, when he was basically in captivity by the Babylonians. And these wise men may have come looking for this baby Jesus because they heard the gospel, they heard about the God of Israel from Daniel, and they were influenced by his faithfulness. And this was passed down from the original wise men to their sons, and then ultimately to these wise men that we see in the scripture that obediently follow the God of Israel and come to see baby Jesus. Somehow they knew about Jesus. They knew who this king was. They came to actually worship him. They bow down when they see this baby. They know who he is. They're anticipating him. So they had to have heard the gospel from somewhere. And so it's a very real possibility that these guys were there because of the faithfulness of Daniel, because he shared his faith with them and they saw his faith in action while he was there, and God blessed him and put him in a position over the Babylonian magi and sorcerers. And you can go back to the book of Daniel to read more about that, refresh your memory with that. Another cool thing, chances are the wise men don't necessarily belong in our manger scenes at all. A lot of things around the manger are also historically inaccurate. We'll talk about that in another video. But the wise men actually being there in the manger scene is possibly a stretch. And this is kind of like the first point we had about the three wise men, but we don't necessarily know how old baby Jesus was when they came. And it was a possibility that baby Jesus wasn't necessarily a baby by this time. And we can see this when we look, if we go to verse 3, where King Herod is brought up in this story. The wise men come from the east to worship this king, and King Herod catches wind of this, that there's a newborn king that the Israelis are calling him, and he gets insecure because he hears that a king has been born, and he says, oh no, this is a threat to my throne. And so we see he basically tries to bully the wise men into coming back and telling him where this baby king is so he can go kill him. He wants to eliminate any possibility of anybody taking the throne from him. He was a brutal king, killed many, many people that were close to him. But he saw this king that was being born as a threat. And but if we look at scripture even further, when the wise men leave, they're actually told by an angel not to go back and talk to Herod, and they don't. And so because he doesn't get the information, the accurate information as to where this baby king is, we see Herod issues an edict, and all of the babies in verses 16 through 18 under 2 years of age are killed. And so chances are this baby Jesus by this time could have been up to 2 years old. He could have been toddler Jesus by this point when the wise men got there. So it's very true they could have came and seen a baby, but it's more than likely that he was closer to toddler age at that time. And so that's another cool fact. Hopefully I didn't ruin the manger scene for you. I like knowing the details. I like knowing the facts. If you need a Bible so you can read more about this stuff, Three Strands Ministries gives out free study Bibles. If you're local, let me know. I can mail one to your house, or I can get one to you. If you want to give one as a last-minute Christmas gift, get up with me. I'd love to give you one. If you have any other questions, send them my way. I'd love to answer them. But until the next video, Merry Christmas, and I love y'all. Blessings.